Hello there, everyone. Welcome to today's episode. I hear so much talk about performance and achievement and what it is I want to accomplish and what my goals are in life and in my career. And that usually is a conversation that is also coupled with how stressed people are and how busy they are and just the busyness that seems to take over our lives. And I can't help but think, I can't help but step back. And certainly you guys are aware of this on this show and ask, what's it all for? Meaning, why are we doing this? What is it that we expect to get on the other side of all of these pursuits? We find, and we've investigated these journeys through the years, that so many of us, when we pursue these particular accomplishments and goals, they don't really produce the experience of life and of work that we hoped they would. And so it brings us back to that question of, what's it all for? Well, as you might imagine, I've got a few thoughts on this particular subject, but I wanted to dive in with a couple of guests and some experts that are out there in the field that are working with their clients and their audiences and their organizations, all different groups that they work with, in this manner of how do we really look at what it is that we are really after. How do we bring that into our everyday lives and work so that we feel more aligned, we feel more connected, we feel more alive, a word I know that we're going to be coming back to today. And so to line up these conversations, it's going to be a topic that we revisit, I'm sure, with some regularity on this show. But to kick us off, I wanted to reach out to Cara Bradley, somebody who I've had the pleasure of speaking with previously. Let me give you Cara's background, and then we'll welcome her to the show, and we'll dive in from there. So Cara Bradley is a leading authority of mind-body training, having led thousands through her signature strategies to get out of their head and into their body, something I really valued earlier in my life, so that they can live in optimal states, and specifically states of flow. She got to know flow as a competitive figure skater, a pro skater for rollerblade, and later refined her understanding of flow through the study of yoga and meditation. Now, Cara shares that experience and that expertise in mental strength training and embodied leadership, embodied, another term that we're going to come back to today, with Fortune 500 companies, entrepreneurial startups, as well as collegiate sports teams. Cara is the author of On the Verge, a book actually I got to read through as well. And she's the founder of the award-winning Verge Yoga Center in Philadelphia, partners with the Flow Genome Project, as well as the wearable and wellness brands of Muse and Happify, some really great tools, and continues to work with the best and brightest in the ultimate human performance and leadership development fields. And with that, Cara, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Luke. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So maybe if we start a little bit at the kind of the end of the spectrum, meaning where this journey seems to be taking us, what it is that we all seem to be after. Because I see so many people that are out there, they're stressed, they're struggling, or maybe they're not struggling, maybe they're just a little bit frustrated that something it doesn't seem to be clicking and producing the experience of life that they're really after. And I'm curious, with the work that you've done with leaders and executives and athletes and just individuals in their lives, when you look behind it all, when you look behind the goals, you look behind the pursuits, what does it seem that people are really after in life?
It's so simple. We're looking to feel alive. We're really seeking aliveness. Engagement and aliveness is what makes us feel relevant. It makes us feel like we're contributing to the world or sucking the marrow out of life if it's an intense moment. And so underneath it all, we're seeking this, I like to call it high definition experience of life. But yet I think we get caught up in what I call our busy mind, right? Which is just lots of thoughts and transactions and things that we think we need to do or should have done or should have said, or all that information that's constantly going through our mind. And we start looking for that experience through the clutter and chaos of an overcrowded mind. When if we drop below it and get into our body and start to really feel what's happening in any moment, positive or negative, we start to feel what it's like to be alive, be in our skin in this moment. And I really think that's where we find this contentment. So it's different than the word happiness. It's a contentment with the moment. It's an okayness with now. And from there, I think that, we access our intelligence, we access our intuition, we have the ability to be compassionate and connect with one another on a whole different level.
That's interesting, because when you describe things like the contentment of this moment, okay with what's now, bringing in elements of compassion as well into the way you describe this. It's an interesting juxtaposition, because I think when most people think of that feeling of alive or aliveness, yes, there's a vibrancy there, but also it tends to be, well, that's something that's got to be exciting and it's got to be a bit out there. We've got to be kind of pushing ourselves to feel that. And you're not quite describing it that way. Sure, it can contain that, but you're describing it a little bit more subtly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's amazing when I'm out there on the road speaking to organizations or at conferences, I always pose this question: what makes you feel fully alive?
Hmm.
And I have this word cloud that goes up. It's kind of fun, but generally the words that and the adjectives that people come up with are calm, clear, content, stable, at ease, relaxed, alert. They're not these like big moments that we think they should be. They're actually very simple moments when they feel in their life. And then the second question I often ask is, what makes you feel fully alive? And the answers I get, I mean, universal, right? And all free, by the way. When I'm with my dog, when I'm at the beach, when I'm in the woods, when I'm reading a book, when I'm playing with my child, when I'm reading, when I'm, the simplest things. We think it's all out there, that, it's on vacation, or it's when I retire, or it's when I do this or get this or lose that. But actually being fully alive is at our fingertips. So my passion is to help people recognize the aliveness that's happening right now.
Excellent. So tell us about some of what those moments have in common. So whether we're taking the hike in the woods, whether we're on the beach, we're playing with our dog, we're reading a book, we're feeling the breeze across our skin. What is it that's in common about those moments that can teach us how to begin to recognize or connect to this aliveness that is always there?
That's a great question. Really, really great. It's presence, right? We can call it many things, but when we're enraptured in a moment, when we feel the skin on, our skin tingle, or we feel our heart starting to race, or we feel ourselves starting to be drawn into something more deeply, that's aliveness, that's presence. And it can happen creating a spreadsheet. It can happen in mowing the lawn. So these moments when we just feel okay, all is well, right here for this moment, whether I'm right or wrong, whether I get the raise or not, whether I get the sale or not, whether anything happens, you kind of let go of the agenda of what you think needs to happen, and you're just in it. Now, sometimes it's micro, like a second or 2 seconds or 3 seconds. But once we start to recognize moments of aliveness, and we may have to just go to outside of work to start. We may have to go to the woods and the mountains and our sport or our hobby to find and become familiar with aliveness, because we're not conditioned to really see these big states or these states of high definition in ordinary life or even at work. So we start to recognize them all day long. I often tell people, at the end of the day, just reflect back and think about, when did I feel most alive today?
Yeah.
What was it? Where was it? Was I driving home from work and I saw the sunset? Or was it the moment I smelled my delicious lunch that somebody made for me? What were those moments when you just, here I am?
Yeah.
And because those moments leave clues. Once we start to recognize them more and more, now we're going to start to see more moments at work, moments that we didn't think were so great. We start to recognize, okay, I don't mind doing this task so much. It kind of holds my attention, and I like to be alone doing this. And it just flips the coin from looking at the negative or what's not happening to actually what is already happening.
So much of what's there, and I think, because I don't want to miss the subtlety of this because it's so critically important, is that a lot of this that we touch, this aliveness that we connect with, initially we may look to the activities that we're engaged in to understand what that presence is, what that connection is, and what may be bringing it about. But what you're specifically now getting into is that it's leaving clues that are not necessarily about the activity, that are more about the way you specifically understand the way that your body, your mind, your heart learns to connect to these moments, so that being alive, connecting to that aliveness, connecting to that presence is something that is innate within you and less reliant on circumstance. Would that be a fair way of saying it?
Yes, 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 yes. If there's anything that breaks my heart, I heard this question asked once, what breaks your heart? And it sat with me for a while, because I know what breaks my heart is that we're looking to the outside for the answers to the intelligence that's already streaming through us 24/7.
Yeah.
We have incredible genius, every single one of us. But when we get stuck up in our head and our doubt and fear and what we should have done or didn't do, we cut ourselves off at the neck, literally, and we don't make ourselves available to sense into that intelligence, that direction, that wisdom. So I love to also play with going back to childhood experiences. And oftentimes I'll have people close their eyes for like 2 or 3 minutes and go back to something that you did as a child over and over again, where you remember vividly the smells, what you saw, what you heard, what you tasted, the way your body felt when you were doing it. Oftentimes it's, as simple as playing in the backyard until the sun went down and just watching the fireflies. I mean, it's amazing how simple we get in these moments of aliveness. Now, those moments have not gone away. It's just that we have dulled ourselves or dulled our awareness to our senses because we spend more time in the thinking mind. Yeah. Flow, as you mentioned before, and we can get into it a little bit more, is when our senses light up again. So it's not something that we're trying to make happen. We didn't try to make that happen as a kid. We were just there in the backyard with the sun setting and the smell of the cut grass and the fireflies and the twinkling light of your backyard light or something. We can get into these experiences. We remember them. So our senses haven't really gotten duller. It's just that we've become dulled to our senses.
It's interesting because the way that I've talked about this in the past is that we're learning to touch life directly again, yes. Right? So you talk about this idea of the overcrowded mind and how we can move past the overcrowded mind into our body, which includes the senses. And so that those senses, if they are unfiltered, if we're not weighing everything against all the other things that are racing through our minds, right, then we can actually experience more directly. We can touch life directly. And that's literally the aliveness in us is touching the aliveness that is around us at those moments.
Yeah, beautiful.
I'm curious. I want to go to that side, meaning I want to go to the overcrowded mind and getting into flow and everything else. But before I do, I'm curious a little bit about your own journey into this process, right? This is not something you wake up one day and say, I think I'm going to study flow and getting into the aliveness of life. That's not so. I don't think there was a major in that in college. And so I do know, obviously you have an athletic background and you've specifically worked also within the performance fields. But tell us a little bit more. I'd almost even say more of the personal side of this journey of when all of a sudden it started to wake up in you in a different way.
Yes, I'd love to. I have 3 instances that I go back to as a child and young adult. The first one was as a child. I grew up on the Long Island Sound. We used to have a bungalow, a shack basically on the Long Island Sound. And as a young child, I would sit on a rowboat every night during the summer and watch the sunset. It was glorious. And, my family or friends were doing different things and I would just sit there. And I remember as a 10-year-old, I remember feeling the colors. I would recognize that different types of sunsets made me feel differently, whether it was a colorful, cloud-filled sunset or just, the sun, the ball going down over the water. And I just remembered that. And there was some peace, deep peace that I felt watching those sunsets. fast forward a little bit further, as a competitive figure skater, as you said before, I used to do something called figures. Figures back then in competitive figure skating, we needed to really, just as it sounds, trace figure eights on the ice. I'd get a little patch of ice and I would draw a big figure eight with this big compass. And then for an hour, I had to trace this line on the edge of a blade. And I was tested on this. So what I go back to is how my mind and body worked together, because I used to recognize and noted in my, little 12-year-old mind that if I was thinking about something, whether it be something I had to do later or something that I wasn't doing in the moment, I would go flat on my edge. I would go flat. I would not be able to hold a blade. And I remember so specifically saying to myself, no, you have to stay in your body, because when you're in your body, you're on your edge. And, it was like the game I played with myself to not have any thoughts. So that career came and went. And then I ended up being a college track runner. And this is where the real pivot point for me was. I was a mediocre runner, but I had a big race, my last college track race that I start my book with. And what happened during that race was that I had a flow experience. I did a few things differently before the race that I explained, which was really to go off on my own, jog in a rhythm, take a very, very slow warm-up jog for about 10 minutes, repeating to myself personal best, because I wanted to break my record. I'd never done any of those things before a race, but I remember stepping up to the starting line, feeling very much different than I normally did. I felt like I was calm and clear. I remember vividly the sky, the track, the smell of the spring air. And I also remember, and this is the important point, feeling extraordinarily ordinary. There was something very familiar about how I felt when I stood on that starting line. And the gun went off, I took off. It was 2 laps. I ran the 800, grueling race. And the only thought I remember having during that 2 minutes plus race was when I passed our best mid-distance runner. And I remember thinking to myself, she must be having a really bad day because I passed her. Well, I finished the race in 3rd place and my teammates jumped on me. I had no idea because I was just like a gazelle out there. I shaved seconds off my PR, which is crazy in the 800. And I sat there for a moment and I looked up at the clock and I thought, at first I was 19. I was like, I did it. I rocked it, but like literally a wave came over me that brought this feeling of incredible disappointment. And I thought, are you kidding me? You had this race in you your whole career, and you waited to your last race now to show up as an elite runner? And so I knew from that going forward on that day that my life had changed, because I knew if I could remember how to get back to that state, I would do whatever I did, I would do better. And I knew whatever I was or, wanted to do, I would feel better. And so now, many, many years later, I recognize that I had this flow experience. But more importantly than just naming it a flow experience, because that sounds good, was that I felt that feeling of being sitting on that rowboat watching the sunset. There was something very childlike about my state of being that just, I remembered it. It was the sweetest thing. There wasn't a lot of doubt in my mind. I wasn't fearing. I wasn't talking to myself and judging. I was just there like a child watching the fireflies.
There is so much to go into based on what you just shared. one of the first things, there's a lot of things that jump out at me, but one of the first things, and I'm so glad you connected it the way that you did, is the use of the phrase, remember your way back there. And so I think that's one of the things that a lot of us don't realize is that we've had, even if it's just a glimpse of these experiences in our lives, we've had them before. It exists innately within us. And the fact you reconnected it to that feeling of watching the sunset is one of those things, because it doesn't always have to be about the performance. This is a different state that shows up in many manifestations for us. And when you connected those, you remembered that this is something that's within you. This is something that it's okay. What are the patterns? What is it that helps me get there? And certainly you connected a lot of things of dropping judgment and dropping thinking and getting into your body and some rhythm work. And I want to get into that, but it's amazing to me the way you describe it, the fact that if we go back to our childhood, we all have so many different experiences of when we have been there. We just haven't really thought about remembering back that way. And then how do we remember, meaning how do we put the pieces back together now so that we can bring that forward into our lives? Let's dive further into that flow then, in terms of how we create those flow experiences. Because I mean, you brought up a couple of really, really big things of dropping judgment, dropping thought, dropping down into your body. And so where would be best to begin for people to understand what it means, or how we approach this idea of dropping into a flow state?
Yeah, it's a big topic,
Yeah.
and we can go many ways. And I like to just stay with the simple, because that's
Great.
the kind of teacher I am, because I just yearn for everyone to at least pull a little piece of this and go home with it, because it's within us all. And like I said before, what breaks my heart is untapped human potential. And that doesn't mean making $1 million or, having whatever likes on Facebook. Potential is our belief in our own intelligence, our belief in our own innate capacities. And so it is a remembering. And when we can get out of our head and get into our body and start to move and breathe from this whole integrated system, we feel more awake and alive. And when we feel more awake and alive, we do better. I mean, we just naturally do better. So that is like the byproduct, is the performance, and the success is the byproduct of feeling alive. And recognizing also, and we can get into this, what doesn't make you feel alive. So that's really important as well, because when we notice what doesn't make us feel alive, then it's a way back as well. Mm-hmm. So again, going back to those questions, what does it feel like to be fully alive? What makes you feel fully alive? What are the things that you do all day long? Becoming familiar with first. And I love to go back to the definition of meditation in Tibetan is the word gom, G-O-M. Gom means to become familiar with. So I tell people, you could meditate on anything. It just means you're becoming familiar with. Well, why not become familiar with our states of being throughout the day, moment to moment? What state am I in right now? Right now, I mean, I was noticing as you were speaking, Luke, that I was getting these goosebumps. I was getting goosebumps not only on my arms, but on my legs. And so I felt this aliveness. There was something you were saying that was triggering this excitement in me, and I was feeling alive. This kind of nonverbal communication is happening all the time. So when we can just get out of our own way and recognize that the gem is inside, and this isn't new agey. This is really what's happening. This extraordinary intelligence and communication that's happening in us and between us constantly. So I'll go back to what you were talking about with flow. And when you think about flow, a lot of people think about extreme athletes. And the reason why we think about extreme athletes is because they've been used to research flow. One of my friends, Stephen Cutler, he wrote a great book called The Rise of Superman. He's done a ton of investigation into this. And because there's something to measure there with extreme athletes, it's easy to measure their optimal states. But actually, and Csikszentmihalyi, who's the godfather of flow, wrote the seminal book called Flow in the early 90s, which is when I finally figured out what happened to me during my race. He talks about flow being a spectrum of states.
Yeah.
So it's not just an on and off switch. There's a spectrum. There's micro flow and macro flow. Macro flow are those huge moments, those big moments, both positive and seemingly negative.
Mm-hmm.
You think about the heroic efforts of people during a big tragedy. When, somebody's lifting the car off a child, or, I'm just giving a horrible example, but we think about jumping over a fence to run away from a fire or something. We have these unbelievable powers. Microflow are more subtle. These are moments of perhaps concentration when we get lost in a book, or focus when we're coding. Really, so there's microflow, more subtle moments. I like to play in the microflow moments because I think that we can recognize them throughout the day. And when we start to recognize microflow, we can start to train ourselves or our nervous system to sustain these moments for longer periods of time.
Well, in off that idea of the microflow side of this, that's what so many of us, that's what we have access to on an everyday type of basis. It's not the extraordinary, it's the ordinary. Even as you described, being there at the starting line, there was this sense of this ordinariness of kind of being there at that particular moment in time. And that's, when we talk about what it is that we're doing all of this for, is that we want to feel alive. We want also that calm and that connectedness to what it is that we have in our life. And that's not just the big moments. It's the every little day. And the more that those types of moments build up, that's when we feel, this aliveness kind of taking over. Now, you mentioned something in one of the ways that you prepared for the race. And I'm curious if you could extract on this a little further, because you mentioned that you got into some rhythmic movement. You found a pace. And one of the reasons why that jumps out is not only just as a preparation for flow, because I've heard you mention stuff like this before. I've used this before in teaching people meditation, of how that actually eases them into the type of processes and some of the sitting practices we may do. But there's also, when we tap into that aliveness in life, and I don't know if this fits under micro or macro or where this fits in the flow process, but it does seem like we find a rhythm of life that seems to fit us. And so I'm curious what you found in the use of rhythm to create flow, but also the use of kind of recognizing what's our natural pace in life and how that factors into this.
You bring up such a great point. And I've done a lot of Google searches on this, I have to say, because there's not a lot of research done yet on rhythm and flow. And I do believe that it is a flow trigger, because what's happening when we move or we breathe in rhythm. So movement could be like a run. Movement could be knitting. Movement could be dancing. It could be, playing the piano in doing your scales. So it doesn't always have to mean a sport. But when we're moving in rhythm, it's settling our nervous system. It's stabilizing the autonomic nervous system, which I believe that stability is really a almost a precursor to flow. Doesn't have to be, but for everyday people, we're not talking about action sports folks, but everyday people, to settle and stabilize gives you a foundation to fly, to then flow. So what I do often when I do this at conferences all the time, I get a crowd up and we'll move and breathe in a very slow rhythm, synchronizing breath and movement to settle and stabilize the busy mind. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But what happens when we breathe in a deep rhythm, it's called coherent breathing. Coherent breathing has been researched, so it's 5 to 6 seconds per inhale and per exhale. You can look for practices on YouTube. When we breathe in a deep rhythmic breath, it settles us in a way that helps us feel more clear and calm. Clear and calm really is what we talk about in the mindfulness world. When we're mindful, we are both awake and alert, yet calm and at ease. So breathing in rhythm off the bat, we're going to shift into a more settled state. When we start to move and breathe now we're getting out of our head and we're dropping into movement. Because when you start moving, whether you be in a yoga class or Tai Chi, or you're on a run, or you're swimming, or you're rowing, or you're biking, anything that's moving your body in rhythm, you're going to naturally bring your awareness down below the neck. And when that happens, now we start getting back to the senses. Now we start noticing what we're smelling, what we're feeling, what we're seeing, tasting, hearing. So, it goes hand in hand, but I love the idea of just moving and breathing in rhythm does help us settle. Now, there is a little bit of research done with childhood trauma and this guy, gosh, I forget his name. I think it's Dr. Barry Levine, I want to say, and I'm so sorry if because I'm just really finding out more about him. But what he has found is that hip hop has been a tremendous tool for helping children with trauma kind of jump patterns a little bit, jump out of that state of defensiveness. Because with hip hop, you think about it, there's an awesome rhythm. So it's not only the rhythm of the music, but it's making you want to move your body, right? So now your body's getting into the movement, and the words, the way that the words are structured, they're in rhythm as well. So now you have a kid start singing, moving, hearing a beat, and they're settling and jumping out and really forgetting they're supposed to be on edge or in the defense. I know that's a little bit off, but I find it so fascinating.
Wow, we'll take that to a different conversation at some point, because that just triggered a bunch of different things for me. But that really is interesting, because there is also a boldness that is there within the moment, the movements as well within hip hop, that I can see if you combine all of these factors, that could have that's very interesting. That's extremely interesting work. I want to come back to this idea of the busy mind, because if there is one thing that holds constant of the individuals that I speak with, it is the busyness of their minds. And how is it that we can drop past that? How is it that we can get underneath it? And so I wonder if you could share a bit, because we've talked about the idea of getting into the body and out of the mind, but that's one thing to say, it's another to do. So take us through this a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, we're all busy. I mean, we spend so much of our waking day in our heads, and we become like these brains on a stick, right? We walk around disconnected from what's happening beneath us and around us, within each other, interpersonal. And so if we can just label it, or I just label it the busy mind, because we all have one. And when we start to get to know, so much of all of this comes back to mindfulness, really. It's getting to know, becoming familiar with our busy mind. What is my mind so busy doing all day long? When we can become curious, and sometimes I break out the phone in a talk, and I hate to compare our minds to the phone, but it's just such an easy analogy for people. We understand those darn phones so well. We can go into apps, we can open up settings, we can change settings. We're very sophisticated when it comes to our smartphones. Yet we have no idea how to change settings in our mind. And so the first step is just to get to know what you're doing. And so I often encourage people to just continue to ask yourself, where am I right now? Where am I right now? Start to notice your state. Start to notice what you're thinking about. Oh, I'm in self-doubt. Oh, I'm thinking about vacation. Oh, I'm doing this. Just be playful. You don't have to be all serious about it. There I go again, thinking about lunch. It's 9 a.m. in the morning and I'm thinking about lunch. You start to get to know your busy mind. Now you can start to recognize patterns. And it's really about patterns. We are conditioned. What we do repetitively, we lay down these patterns, mental, emotional, physical patterns. When we start to get to know our patterns, now we become empowered. Now we can start interrupting patterns and we can start changing patterns. And I just have to really emphasize, this is within our power. Every single one of us. And here's the takeaway. Every state of being, we go through so many, who knows how many different states during the day, mental, emotional, physical states of being. If we don't start prioritizing our state of being to be optimal, and I don't mean optimal like you've got to be cheery, rah-rah all day long. I'm talking optimal as in clear and calm, awake and alert, in it, on it, right?
Yeah.
If we don't prioritize our state of being, the world will prioritize it for us. It will choose our state. And then we become really, we just fall at the mercy of whatever's happening around us, the cranky boss or the cranky kid or the traffic jam. When we start to say, no, my state is number one. Right now, my state is number one. What do I need to do right now to become right here, right now, to come into the moment, to feel more alive, to be in flow? Then you start to understand the knobs and levers that you need to just tweak here and there. It might be that breath. It might be a glass of water. It might be a walk. It might be a pause, some quiet time, change of scenery. Then we get out of our head, right? So make your state your number one is really how we start driving our own ship.
Yeah. That's wonderfully said. And I think, you made the point before, and it's something that, again, it's so easy for us to lose sight of, is that unfortunately we're wired at this point from evolutionary and developmental standpoints, where we tend to look very much outside of ourselves for sake of survival and, threat assessment and stress assessment, all those types of things. And it has us focusing on what's out there coming at us at any given moment. Now, the thing that interrupts that, or the thing that begins to change that orientation, is exactly what you're describing, what Cara's describing here, is that optimal state. Because if we can be in an optimal state and something's going on outside of us, and we've become more familiar with the way that our minds and our bodies operate, we can recognize it as it's coming up, and we're not going to have to go there, or we can assess it as something much different than a threat. We're not being chased around by saber-toothed tigers anymore, even though it may feel like it in the boardroom. So it's just not the case. And so the more that we can assess that and work on our state, it totally changes the way that we orient towards life. I even describe it this as coming at life from the inside out, meaning the internal state, and then we meet the external.
Love that.
Let me ask. So there's so many different things I still want to go into, but I know we've got only a little time here. So let me go into the embodiment side of this, because I think this is another aspect of that state. And when we talk about that idea of dropping from mind into body, this term embodiment is popping up more and more, because the importance of it, I think, is popping up more and more. And obviously, with your background and then studying yoga and meditation as part of this whole journey, I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit further of what the embodiment portion, or what embodiment means when we talk about this optimal state.
Yeah, and the word embodiment confuses a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, our bodies and our minds aren't separate. It's just where we spend our time. And if we spend our time up in our head thinking mind, running around with the speed of life, then we're just forgetting about what's happening below the neck. So our bodies and minds aren't disconnected, but being embodied means bringing it all into the equation. So couple of things. We have different states of awareness. We have mental awareness. We can be aware of our thoughts. Emotional awareness. We can be aware of what we're feeling, our emotions in the moment. And then there's this beautiful palette of other awarenesses. One of them is called interoceptive awareness. Interoceptive awareness is just a fancy way of saying I'm aware of what's happening internally. So when we have a gut sense, that's an interoceptive signal that something just shifted in you based on what's happening around you. So, I'm not here to tell you what type of gut clench means whatever, but just recognize when your gut clenches or your throat tightens, there's a signal. Something is shifting. because we are supremely intelligent beings. Like dogs can sniff so much. We can sniff so much. So our breath pattern is huge. Our breath pattern mirrors our emotional patterns. For every emotion, there is a correlating breath pattern. So like I said before, coherent breathing, deep balanced breaths will help us become more calm and clear. That's all you need to know. Deep balanced breaths will help you become more calm and clear. It is our direct knob to our nervous system. It's amazing, and it's free. Other things like heart racing, starting to sweat, starting to get chilled or not feeling so great. This is all interoceptive awareness. Then we have something even below that. And this is the work of Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory. And I won't geek out too much on you, but just to let you know that there's something called neuroception. Neuroception is what's happening inside and around us that we're unconscious of. And it's usually a sign of safety or defense. We're on the defense. He doesn't talk about stress, by the way. He talks about being on the defense. Yeah. We're on the defense. I mean, let's put it this way. Watch Game of Thrones and your body's going to be in defense, right? Anything in the news or just even traffic, and your body tightens. So there's so often that we are on the defense. But here's the thing. It's not until we feel safe, which is the other side, that learning expands, that learning deepens, creativity flourishes. These are all signs of flow. Creativity flourishes, learning flourishes, inner communication flourishes, but that's not to say that we have to feel safe to be in flow, because if you're climbing a mountain, you don't necessarily feel safe. But I'm saying on the micro level that in order to really come into optimal states in everyday life, we want to watch what we're feeling. Start to notice interoceptive awareness. Start to recognize that maybe there are people that put you on edge. And so that's really it. It's just the broad spectrum, this huge palette. Embodiment is just bringing that into the equation. It's not just what you think.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's exceptional about this work is that, and I appreciate you bringing in the science, because there's so much that's being proven out now with neuroscience and positive psychology and all of these different fields that are being researched in a multitude of different ways are proving out a lot of things that maybe even been taught for 2,000 and 2,500 years. And the science is now here to actually understand a lot of it. But when we get down into our bodies in that manner, there's so much more awareness than just simply cognitively what's going on. And we're picking up on this, and we're actually starting to react to what it is that we're picking up on a lot sooner than our brains actually recognize what's going on. The next thing is that when our brains start to recognize what's going on, unfortunately, the brains have a lot of previous experiences to draw on, which clouds the way that we're going to see what's actually happening right now as well. And so our brains are going to start telling us a story about what it thinks this means at any given moment. The more we can get tuned into just recognizing, oh, I'm having a bit of that defense response. Well, if I can connect to my breathing, I can get back into a safety spot. Well, now you're going to be clearer and calmer when you think about whatever it is that you're looking at. Maybe don't do this if a bus is barreling down on you, but in pretty much all other life circumstances we're used to facing, it works. We can do this.
That's right.
Cara, I've got one wrap-up question for you, but I was just curious if there's anything else that you wanted to add to this side of the conversation before we wrap ourselves up.
Yeah, one quick thing is I do believe, and I'm not a scientist, I'm a teacher. I move people. I move people and help them recognize patterns in their body and mind. And what I have a sense is coming next for us, and I'm making a prediction here, is nervous system training. So we've been training our mind. Well, obviously we train our bodies with physical training. We've been training our minds with mindfulness training. We're learning about emotional intelligence and how to regulate emotions. And I do believe the next frontier is with neural exercises and learning how to train our nervous system to be more optimal more often. So oftentimes I'll tell people, training to flow, or you can't make flow happen, but you can train to make your optimal state your default state.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Because, and even just the way that we look at this is that idea of nervous system training, when we think about our nervous system, it is one of the great integrators inside of the whole of our nature and the whole of our body. So the emotional centers and from our heart to our head and the way all of this connects and the way that fires off throughout all the different aspects of our body, nervous system it's the central nervous system for a reason. So the holistic and integrated aspect of what that can bring. I like your prediction, and I hope to actually be an individual who helps push that along with you, because
Yes.
that's a fantastic notion and wonderful way to think about it. So on a different side, we're moving away from the geekiness that honestly I would enjoy for a long time to come. But just to be able to wrap us up, you asked a great question before of what is it that has you come alive? And that's what I'm curious about for you, Cara.
Oh,
What is
for
it that has
me.
you come alive at this point in your life?
Oh, well, nature is always, it is the natural aliveness button for me. Just get me out in the woods or on the mountain and I come alive. Because after a while, words and talking and even human interaction sometimes gets tiring. So to be out in nature just allows the busy mind to settle, and it allows me to really tap into aliveness. Any type of movement, moving my body. Lately, I've been doing some rock climbing, and that's really jazzing me. So I'm constantly playing with ways to be alive. But what lights me up most is helping others light themselves up and recognize that the knobs are within their reach always, and they're free. And I think most of all is helping people trust that their birthright, our birthright, is to feel awake and alive.
Yeah. Cara, I want to thank you so much for being here. It is just always an absolute pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you, Luke. It's such my pleasure.
For everybody tuning in to today, I think there's just a lot of takeaways that we could remind you of at this moment. But I think probably the one is to go ahead and answer that question for yourself of what is it that has you come alive? And what you're going to recognize probably within those moments is that you get very present to those moments, and then you connect to that aliveness, the presence that exists within those moments. When you do that, you're going to start to recognize that exists for you in many, many different moments, many different experiences. You'll find ways of being able to bring that out more and more inside of your life. You may even just find that you have a natural, not just optimal state, but even a natural rhythm to the way that you are meant to approach life. And that is the aliveness coming through you and manifesting in each of your experiences. Thanks again for tuning in today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Check out IPEC's coach training program at ipeccoaching.com/OIA. And of course, to find out about all the conversations, events, gatherings, all the things that we've got upcoming, then head on over to oneideaaway.com/community. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have, please do us the favor of subscribing, reviewing the show, as well as sharing insights or comments that stood out for you in this episode.